Hi, I'm Jasmine Braithwaite with JB Data Strategies, here today to discuss with you development operations and organizational infrastructure. So, development operations is one of the most important functions in a fundraising shop, yet many people don't fully understand what it is for or what it does. Depending on the organization, this work may be called development operations, fundraising operations, advancement services, or development services. While the titles may differ, the core responsibilities are often very similar. What is development operations? Well, development operations supports the people, processes, data systems, and reporting that help a fundraising program function effectively. It is the infrastructure behind the fundraising. While fundraisers are building relationships and securing gifts, development operations helps ensure the organization has the systems, data, processes, and information needed to support those efforts. I'm going to list some of the common areas in fundraising with real life examples where development operations staff create standards. You might begin to understand where every one of these functions relies on data, reporting, processes, or technology in some sort of way. The first one I'll list is database management. Well, obviously, the database managers and development operations, and sometimes that job title can be used interchangeably. You may see the title database manager, and you may see the title development operations manager, but usually most of the time, or I'm, I will say 99% of the time, I'm tempted to say 100, but 99% of the time, the development operations manager and the database manager will manage your primary database, also known as your primary CRM, relational management system. And of course, with them being in charge of that, they're also going to be in charge of that CRM strategy. And strategy meaning how the database is organized. The data architecture is the term that I'll use there. So the coding on how and the coding and how it's all set up so that when the data is produced for a report, it'll read coherently. When the data is connected to the financial ledger, that it'll be in alignment with those codes as well for the finance team. Or if it's an institution that has alumni, when that alumni information is brought in, the coding in the alumni system and the data CRM, primary data database, are in alignment. So the database operations team is responsible for making sure that those are all in alignment, and that's a cross-functional function. Data Database operations and development operations are responsible for reporting and analytics, as I mentioned before. Not only are they responsible for setting up the architecture of the data as it gets input into the system, they're responsible for actually outputting it in a way that reports on progress to goal and other reports that pretty much everyone in the development team, your fundraising team, all the way up to leadership at a high level will want to see for the results of the activities. Development operations slash database management is responsible for data governance. So, how other people are using that primary CRM, what are they putting in there? What kind of standards for things as small as the titles of some of the constituents that have records in the database and the salutations and things of that nature, how their memberships, how their affinities are added in, how they're classified and grouped in the system, and making sure that that's all consistent. Development operations is responsible for that task. Of course, the most popular task I'll list next is gifts processing. So, of course, you want to be sure that all the money is being entered in timely, in the proper way, in a way that's legible and coherent to everyone who wants to see it. So that's another big responsibility. Technology planning. Development operations is usually responsible for planning the technology of all the different systems that are used within the development fundraising department so that the information gets channeled into the primary database properly and in alignment with that data architecture that was originally set up. And I'll get more into detail that in some further episodes. I can talk for a whole hour on that topic, so don't worry, it's coming. Um, Development operations is usually responsible for project management. Of course, when you think about um, purchasing new technology, even if it's like a text to give platform or something for a Giving Tuesday or an alumni day or anything like that, um, there should be there's usually needs to be some sort of project management to orchestrate the whole thing from start to finish to make sure that there are no steps that get left out. So, and even when you're bringing in a new vendor with a new product and software, usually software with when we're talking development operations, someone has to manage that process. It's usually development operations. Another thing, process improvement. So, development operations is not only responsible for getting everything into the system, but making sure it's being brought in efficiently and in a timely manner and in a way that yields results that everyone can feel good about. Like if they're producing acknowledgement letters, tax letters for gifts, receipts that come out. If an easy example of that, let's say that you've been processing receipts and acknowledgement letters separately on the same day and mailing them both out in separate envelopes, so you're paying double postage. Process improvement would be at least, if your policy is to send out two separate things, the receipt and the acknowledgement letter, the process improvement could be to simply put them in the same envelope so you're not paying double postage. A process improvement also can be, if you can, make it a digital process so you're not paying postage at all, right? So those are some areas that development operations, it would be helpful for them to think of things and be innovative in that way to find the most efficient way and successful way and effective way to get from point A to point B. System integrations, that's a big one that development operations is responsible for. If you've got a system that runs your volunteer management, like Volunteer Hub, for example, and I have no affiliation with any of these companies, just wanted to preface that as I go through these episodes. There are some popular softwares out there. I will be mentioning them from time to time, but they are not asking me. I'm not getting anything in return for that. So yes, if you have a system like Volunteer Hub or whatever if you have a strong volunteer program and you're using some sort of platform to get those volunteers to log in on their end and get their own little user access portal, you may want to consider bringing that information into your primary CRM. You may not want to bring all of it in, but you may want to bring some of it in, at least that they volunteered at a specific fundraising event or initiative, so that when your frontline fundraisers are speaking to their constituents, it'll show before they make that call, hey, this person just volunteered. Let me bring that up. Let me thank them for their volunteering services and things of that nature. So system integrations is very important for development operations to ensure that even if you decide that you don't want to link certain systems, that you've at least vetted it out, thought it through, and found an alternative way for fundraisers to understand the full scope of each constituent and how they have interacted with your organization within a fiscal year at a minimum. So last but not least, the biggest area that I'll touch on is that development operations is responsible for is policies and procedures. Well, you are creating all these processes, you are creating all these efficiencies in development operations, and they're working great. But we love you, you've made all these things happen, but in 3 to 5 years, you may decide that you want to get to the next level of your career and you may leave. Well, if you didn't document all of these great systems that you put in place, a new replacement for you may not understand the rhyme or reason to why you configured certain things certain ways and completely change them all and break certain links within a system that has been working. So, documenting these things is the key to making sure that they last for a long time, and that any replacement that you have, just in case you leave, or maybe you're going on extended leave for some other reason, a sabbatical, parental leave, anything, and you're gone for a few months for whatever reason, and there's someone in there taking your place to keep everything going. Your policies and procedures will be your standard guide to ensure that everything runs smoothly when you're gone. So those are some of the things for development operations and how they keep the department running. Now, how does development operations support fundraising across the organization? Not just within their area of managing the things and the scope of things that development operations has to keep running every day, but how do they affect the other teams? Like individual giving, for example, the frontline fundraisers. Well, a lot of times individual giving officers are creating solicitation letters and appeals, how they're appealing to the donor. Maybe they're sending out something in the fall, or maybe they're sending out something once a fiscal year. For whatever that reason is, they may have segmentation. They may have lapsed donors. They may have long lapsed donors who haven't given within the last couple of fiscal years. They may have donors who have given within the fiscal year and they're asking for an additional gift. And those are all different segments for the appeal. And they may have different language for the letters that they send out depending on the segment. There may be small tweaks in the language of those letters. And in that case, you want to capture in the database the appeal, the primary letter, and then the subcategories of the different segmentation that they receive, so that when it's all done, let's say that season was for a 3-month period, you wanted to track 3 months later, what are my results? Well, your individual giving officer may ask this, and if you forgot to configure the database in a way that tracks those segments, you may end up with that individual giving officer or whoever, team member, whatever their job title is, they may end up having to use Excel. That's a shadow database. It's not going to be kept in the real data. They may be discouraged after a while and stop using the system, which I have seen happen many times where they lose faith in development operations. So understanding understanding how that sort of thing can affect the overall team is important. So another thing in individual giving, donor lists. They may want a certain group of people to call. Maybe it's all the board members. Maybe it's all the people who are in a special affinity group, like maybe it's the grassroots fundraisers. Whatever the club is, there's always board development committees, finance committees within the board. There's always executive committees. They may want lists. They're going to want lists of all types, mid-level donors who have given within the last 6 months or within the last 3 fiscal years. There's lists galore. The request will never stop. And in order for the data that you give them to be accurate, the data has to be organized in a way that information can be pulled consistently every time. And if these lists cannot be pulled, a lot of the times it hinders the individual giving team's ability to do their job to the best that they can. And response reporting, as I mentioned before, on those appeals and whatever the segmentation of those solicitations were, they want to know the results, and they want to know them 3 months out, 6 months out, a fiscal year out. And then the next fiscal year, when that season comes around again, how did it perform last year? And based on that performance, what kinds of tweaks can I do this year to improve and get a better result? So it is important that development operations is speaking with individual giving officers regularly to ensure that the data flows in a way that is useful and not just recording something at the lowest quality standard possible just to get it in there. It's not just to get it in there, it's to also extract it out in a meaningful way. And don't forget, last but not least, with individual giving donors, campaign tracking. What if there's a major capital campaign coming up? It could be multiple years. You have to establish what types of pledges. Are they multi-year pledges? What sorts of funds are they going to? Do you have to create new funds? Is it the building fund, or are they building a new wing of a hospital? That architecture needs to be all set up, and the types of reports that you're going to create for the individual giving team to be able to utilize That's all development operations. uh, the ideas are there for the individual giving team, but how do you make those ideas concrete in a way that at any moment you can get a snapshot of the performance of the ideas? That's that's one of the major ways that development operations interacts with individual giving. And the same goes for major gifts. And with major gifts, you can throw portfolio management into the mix. So the frontline fundraisers who have a set of 50 to 100 constituents within a database that they call regularly, that they are building a rapport with, that they are cultivating them for a large gift, stewarding them along in the process, in the moves management process. So what date? What, for example, what actual date did that specific fundraiser start that interaction? Did it start at the start of a specific fiscal year? Did it start as a result of attending a donor reception of some sort where a friend brought a friend? How is that information getting in the database? How is that person getting into their portfolio? Is there a qualification process that happens with data that of constituents who are already in the database, new donors? All of that is extremely important to the major gifts team and the major gifts officers. So, and like I mentioned, that whole moves management strategy. So, what are the statuses? Is it just hot, warm, cold? Is it as simple as that? Is it something like qualified, disqualified, pending? What sorts of statuses do you want to be able to pull data on? As I mentioned, you're putting that information in there, you're putting in all the interactions. This phone call was made 2 weeks ago. This in-person meeting was made yesterday. All of that for major gifts, the major gifts team needs to be recorded in the system. Little scribble hand notes here and there, that's not a sustainable process that'll last multiple fiscal years. And not to mention, as I mentioned before, development operations staff can leave. But what happens when the major gift staff leaves as well? All of those interactions. If they've been cultivating a donor and that donor is about ready to give that multi-million-dollar, six-figure, seven-figure gift, but something happened to the major donor, they're no longer with your organization, where are all the notes? Was it in their notebook? Was it in an Excel spreadsheet? Or was it recorded properly in the primary CRM? And major gift officers are usually pretty busy. What did development operations do, or fundraising operations, or advancement services, or whatever, fill in the blank there? What did they do to make it easy for the fundraiser to be able to easily record their information? Did they make it so that all the emails that get sent out are linked directly to the CRM, a technology link that is possible? The larger database CRM systems that you purchase usually have an integration directly with your Google, if you're using Google Suite, or if you're using Microsoft Office 365, you can click buttons. There's little little plugins, I'll call them. I know 365 has a plugin, and so does Google. So does Google Suite, where you can literally open up a constituent record in Google, in Gmail, or in Outlook, and put that whole email interaction directly into that appropriate section within the database. Do you have that configured? Do you make it easy for the information to go into the system? These sorts of things matter a lot with major gifts, especially if they're on the go, fundraising all the time. It's up to development operations, a good development operations team, even if it's a one-man show, to set up those configurations so that you are doing all that you can to capture very important information for the future and for today. Donor research is in there too. If you've got a new donor and they randomly gave $5,000 online and you've never seen them before within your data system, they may be testing out your organization to see how you respond, to see if you give them a call to thank them and things of that nature, or how quickly you send out the acknowledgement letter. How do you treat them? Donor research is a big piece of that. Do you have a system integrated into your primary CRM, or do you have a separate system that you use to do quick donor research on them to see their wealth ratings and things of that nature at a minimum? And is it integrated with your primary CRM? These things all matter for major gifts. And if they're missing, your major gifts team they don't have everything that they could have to do the best that they can to bring in higher donation amounts. Prospect tracking. So, do they have potential donors who are needing to be tracked in any sort of way? Whether did they answer that phone call? Did they reply to the email? Did they show up? All of those things are things to be tracked, and they can be tracked within the primary CRM. So there's the mid-level giving team as well, and they are always segmenting donors. Usually, if mid-level starts with donors who give cumulatively over $1,000 within a fiscal year, maybe that is anywhere between 1,000 to 5,000. And how are you segmenting the donors within that amount? Maybe it's $1,000 to 10,000. Maybe it's $5,000 to $20,000, depending on the the segmentation you have within your database and what was set up to define your mid-level, grassroots, individual giving, major giving, principal giving. Whatever way that you have defined that, there are usually sub-segments within there. And there are ways that you can separate and track them within your system. And that's important for mid-level giving. Of course, performance reporting to keep up and make sure, not only with mid-level, with all levels, that you are tracking which categories they fall into. And sometimes that determines whose portfolio they'll be in. Oftentimes it does, actually. And then there's the pipeline analysis. Annual giving is in there. So the annual giving manager can easily come to the development operations team very frequently for direct mail purposes. They'll need the distribution lists. They'll need to know the performance for the previous year to determine what kind of ask strings they're going to do for the next mailing. They'll want the email distribution list set up. They'll want to know the performance, how their appeals are performing, if they're being sent out every quarter, and the corresponding email campaigns as well that have to do with those direct mail initiatives. And of course, the appeal reporting. So that response analysis is extremely important to let them know. Maybe they're experimenting. Maybe they gave free gifts one year, or for one mailing, maybe they did a long lapse mailing of donors who haven't given within the past 96 months. And they want to do a special reactivation campaign. Results on all those things are extremely important. Putting together the distribution lists, segmenting them out in the data, all of that happens in development operations. The design doesn't happen in development operations, but in a lot of cases, development operations will have to coordinate with probably the marketing and communications team when it comes to setting up donation pages as well. Usually development operations sets those up too. So the corresponding donation pages for each direct mail campaign, and you might do some A/B testing on how you send all those things out. All of that matters, and all of that is fueled in development operations. And if it's not configured that way in your team right now, it's worth considering configuring it that way so that at least you run it by development operations to ensure that all of the data is consistent within your primary database CRM. And of course, moving on, the grants team is not left out of this. There's the grant proposal tracking. There's the deadline management and the fundraising history and the reporting out on that. And were they awarded? How much were they awarded? All of that can be managed and should be logged in your primary database, and development operations sets up the configurations to facilitate that process. And let's not forget about special events, whether they are large signature events, whether they are smaller free events. The registration systems usually come out of development operations. And if you purchase in a separate event software, there is a huge benefit to ensuring that data, all those registrants and all of that gets funneled back into the primary CRM. And you'll hear me say that all the time, because at the end of it all, what really matters is that your fundraisers are able to see the full history of that constituent and every interaction that they've had with your organization to understand what they're interested in, to be able to speak to them in an intelligent way. If it's a grant maker, if it's a high profile constituent, to know if they should be, the database should, speaking of high profile constituents, the database should be able to indicate whether they are such and not get them swept up into big general emails that go out, big email blasts. You probably wouldn't send all of your email blasts that you send out twice a week to the President of the United States, for example. So the segmentation of people is extremely important. So CRM integration is everything. Event reporting. How many people attended the event? Is a thank you email going to be sent out the following morning after a large event like a gala? If so, where were all of the emails of the attendees recorded? A lot of times these days, CRM systems have event registration functionality, and it can be used usually on iPads directly at the check-in table at events these days with the way technology is. And if you have a separate system, it's worth it to look into the system, your primary CRM, to see if that works already. The more easily the data can come into your CRM, the better it is, especially if you're short-staffed, especially if your development operations team is not that large. So these are just, some ways that development operations touches all other areas of development within the department outside of their daily functions of keeping the ship afloat, flying the plane, sometimes swapping out the engine while the plane is in the air. Another area is leadership. It's very common. Leadership wants dashboards. They don't want to request reports all the time. They want to click a button and see where we're at, fiscal year to date revenue comparison compared to where are we right now compared to fiscal year to date last year and the year before that. What are the trends? The dashboard at a basic minimum should contain that in all major fundraising areas within the department. And those are the KPIs, key performance indicators, and it also helps with strategic planning for leadership as well. If they see trends in certain areas, it can help them with forecasting what they're going to fundraise the following year, and really develop the strategy around what's working and what's not. The finance team uses development operations configurations regularly. Gift reconciliation of all those transactions that come in, that's probably happening weekly, daily, monthly, quarterly, annually at the close of the fiscal year, relating to the annual audit as well. It's all pretty normal, and keeping the systems working together makes that process a lot easier. Revenue reporting, audit support, as I just mentioned, and just general financial ledger coordination to make sure that you're not speaking two different languages. And we'll get into that more in another episode. Marketing and communications. So the email lists, that can be extremely important. The marketing and communications team is not determining who gets what email. They do not know how to go into your primary CRM and exclude those high profile net worth donors who should not get all the random emails that are sent out multiple times a week. That is all done in development operations, because development operations is the keeper of the data and the one who orchestrates the segmentation for these sorts of lists. So it all weaves together, and I hope you're starting to see now how development operations pretty much touches all areas in fundraising and keeps the ship afloat. Because if any of these areas fall apart, you know the consequences. I'm sure we've all experienced them. So, constituent engagement data as well. A lot of times you can configure your database and communications to be able to see the engagement. Who's opening the emails? Who's clicking on them? All of those little rates of performance and statistics you should it's worth it to look and see if your primary CRM has an email functionality. They're not always the systems that are built to be one size fit all, they're not always the best. You can always find a one-off software that's going to do really good at one thing, like really good at a really good email software, a really good event management software. But you should always, for best practice, look at what features are already in your primary CRM and see if it works. Because if it does work, you can give specific access levels to your communications team. You can create the lists where all you have to do is pull in those lists into their email distribution section, and it's coming directly from your CRM, and you don't even have to import or export in any results and things of that nature. Because sometimes when you buy those other systems, you're regularly importing and exporting out data. And of course, you can get systems like Zapier or Omatic. Again, I'm naming things here to help get those imports and exports to be automated to the best of your ability. But if you can get it to work directly in your system, you're not only making it quicker and easier, but you're probably saving money too for your organization, and that's always a plus. Some other areas that development operations always, in the 2 decades that I've been in this, board reports usually come from the fundraising operations team, development operations. Sometimes it comes from finance, but you really have to just determine what type of reporting you need. Are you reporting commitments? Are you reporting cash? Are you reporting it within what time period? And I've seen it where finance pulls the data if they don't trust the database. And again, that all comes back to making sure that you have everything you need to create the right database architecture. We'll talk about that in another episode when people lose faith in the database. Not this one. We're just talking about the organizational infrastructure for this one. So, yeah, fundraising performance, campaign results, donor trends, strategic metrics of all sorts, all of that comes from the database. And I think hopefully I've explained enough for you to see that link and for the light bulb to have went off in your mind. So with all of that being the case, when you think about how development operations really interacts with all areas within a fundraising shop, why? Then why is this role often misunderstood? Well, many organizations see development operations as merely gifts processing or database management or report writing. In reality, the role often sits in the intersection of people, processes, technology, and data strategy. And if you really think about all those areas that I just listed and how it all interacts, this we're not just dealing with gift processing here, folks. There's a lot more to it than that. That's just, I think that gifts processing seems to be the big thing. Oh, they just do database. Oh, they just do gifts processing and development operations. I think that's just the case because finance is so, I don't know they're on point. Things need to be 100% accurate. I'll talk in another episode about how sometimes that's not possible. But in a lot of cases, finance is always interacting with somebody in the development operations / database area. And so people who don't know much about what the development operations staff are doing, they're always like, oh, that's gifts processing. Oh, that's just database. Well, hopefully I've explained to you how that is not just that by now. Configuring your campaigns, configuring your direct mail, configuring your emails, configuring all of your segmentation. That all happens. All of your event results, who attended the event, that's all development operations, folks. It's important stuff. And if it's not organized properly, you're not going to be able to report out on your results. Not only that, but other things. And I'll talk about the other things momentarily. But development operations professionals are frequently responsible for evaluating systems, supporting implementations of those systems, the development reporting frameworks, improving processes, establishing data standards, and helping organizations make better decisions. Because you can try out something, or you can make a data-driven decision. Which one would you rather do? Much of this work happens behind the scenes, and in many organizations, especially smaller fundraising shops, leadership often expect development operations staff to know the ins and outs of these responsibilities without having the training or experience to do so effectively. When operations is working well, people often don't know it. They simply experience better reporting, cleaner data, stronger processes, more efficient workflows, and better decision making. But when the team is not experienced enough in that in development operations, or maybe they just weren't directed to the professional development that would really help enhance that. I would go as far as saying you can't expect them to be experts in that way. If everyone has always treated them just as the gifts processing or database unit, that's what they're going to output. They're not going to be able to help you with strategy as much. It's when you bring them into the conversations that they are able to expand their minds and understand why they do what they do within the database. And if they understand why they do what they do with the database, they'll be able to better shape that data architecture in a way that is useful for everyone on the team. A lot of times it's only when something breaks within development operations that people begin to recognize how important the operational foundation really is. I remember during the pandemic, the place that I was working, I'm not going to name it, they did an analysis. Leadership did an analysis without, it wasn't an analysis that development operations was brought into. But after their analysis, they came out deciding that they needed to put more effort into development operations because development operations fuels the results. And I was so relieved to hear that because I'm like, finally, it's starting to happen. So, organizational infrastructure. When people hear the word infrastructure, they often think of buildings, roads, physical structures. In this context, I'm talking about the organizational infrastructure that allows a nonprofit to operate efficiently. It includes the people, the processes, policies, procedure, technology, data, reporting, and governance. These elements don't operate in isolation. They often connect to other departments, programs, affinity groups of the organizations, and systems across the organizations. Examples. Some of these examples include, as I mentioned, the finance and the financial ledger, the IT team, information technology. These databases, sometimes you need to install certain things on your workstation in order for them to work. Marketing and communications, with everything I mentioned earlier in this video, the programs that are going on within the organization, the affinity groups, executive leadership, and other cross-functional teams. When these elements are strong, documented, aligned, and well-managed, organizations are better positioned to grow, scale, and achieve their goals. Common challenges in fundraising include outdated technology that's been there for like 10 years, disconnected systems, shadow databases, which I've talked about. But let me get back to those disconnected systems. I think I mentioned a moment ago, getting the connectors and integration set up. It really helps when everything funnels into one primary place instead of these systems that are disconnected and don't talk to each other, so that when you want to pick a full picture of what your results are of your work, you may not have it if the systems are not even connected. The shadow databases pop up when people lose faith in the database as a result of the disconnection. So they start using Excel. They start saying, let me pull this data out of the database and I'm going to manage my portfolio. A fundraiser may say, I'm going to manage my portfolio right here in this Excel spreadsheet. And sometimes they give it back at the end of a quarter to the database team or the development operations team. And the development operations team can barely make out what this is and what fields they get imported back into the primary CRM. So that's a worst case scenario. I know of one place where all of the financial aid for students was kept, like as far as the scholarships and everything being fundraised within the fundraising team was all kept in an Excel spreadsheet instead of maybe some sort of financial aid tracker or something where the system could be connected to the primary CRM. That's that's a worst case scenario because sometimes the funds don't get spent and the funders don't want to renew their donations. That's the worst case scenario of having shadow databases and disconnected systems. And the whole goal in development operations is to prevent things like that. Duplicate data entry is another thing that happens. The lack of documentation, limited staff capacity, unclear ownership of systems and processes, inconsistent data standards, software purchases made without operational input. Who's going to run that software after you purchase it? Does it require daily maintenance? Who's going to do it? Are you just going to throw it to the wolves? Are you just going to throw it to development operations and database staff and they'll figure it out? What if they're already at their 8-hour per day capacity as far as their workload? Bringing them into the conversation earlier helps with things like that. Manual workarounds that develop over time. Manual workarounds, people. Why does all this matter? Well, organizations often focus on fundraising results without investing in the operational foundation needed to support those results. Strong operations help organizations make better decisions, improve efficiency, reduce risk, support staff, and prepare for future growth. The goal is not simply to maintain systems. The goal is to create an environment where people, processes, data, and technology work together effectively. So, in closing, development operations is more than database management, more than gifts processing. It's about creating the operational foundation that supports fundraising success as a whole. In future episodes, we'll explore many of these topics in greater detail, including CRM strategy, data governance, technology planning, system integrations, process improvements, and organizational growth. Thank you so much for watching today, and I'll see you in the next video.